Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining me today. I've got a short workshop for you on how to be more assertive with your coworkers. It's called Speak Up, How to Make Your Point Without Starting a Fight. I'm doing this webinar because I've run into a lot of people who tell me, I've got coworkers who are doing something that sort of bugs me, or they're not doing what I want them to do, and I want to say something, but I don't because I'm just afraid that it's just not going to turn out well. So I put this little thing together for you. Hopefully you find some tips that are useful. And at the end of the webinar, you're able to take what you learned and try it out with your coworkers so that ultimately you can say what you think you want to say, and it goes better than maybe it has in the past. So before we really get too far, I'd like to just introduce myself a bit. So I'm a Minnesotan, and I don't think I say you betcha, but I probably do sound like I was born here. I was raised here. I've lived here my whole life. When I was a boy, my grandmother said that I had the gift of gab. I suppose that's why I'm in this business of doing workshops and seminars. When I'm not teaching, I do meeting facilitation. So I run other people's meetings for them, try to keep them on track and keep them from killing each other. And I also serve organizations as a consultant, particularly when people aren't getting along so well and they need somebody to sort of come in, figure out what the deal is, and then get people back on track. I love to learn. I'm all about, I probably spend way too much time on the internet, but there's always a learning project I have. And right now I'm in the middle of two. I'm relearning how to play the piano and hopefully do it better than I have in the past. And for some reason, I got the interest in learning how to play chess. And I don't know why, but that's just what I'm doing right now. And it happens to be the middle of winter, but when it's the summer, I love to eat what I grow and grow what I eat. And so I've got a big vegetable garden, and that's where I spend my time when I'm not working. So let's get after the topic today. Um, what we've got here is Goldilocks. And as we recall, we should recall the story. Goldilocks was a picky child, particularly when it came to chairs and porridge. But today I want to talk about beds. So you recall she ended up in a bed that was just too hard. And when it comes to talking with your coworkers, too hard is the equivalent of being aggressive. Too hard is bad, aggressive is bad. The second bed is too soft. And that is, in terms of our metaphor today, we're gonna say that's equal to being passive. This is not saying what you want or saying it in such a wishy-washy way. Nobody knows what you're talking about, and it just isn't helpful for communication at work or in the rest of our lives for that matter. What we're going for is just right. It's that perfect bed for Goldilocks. That's when you're assertive. Now, assertiveness you can think about in a couple different ways. One way I like to think about it is like, who's the focus on? So there's me, and then there's you. And if it's all about me, I just want to make sure I say what I want to say. I want you to make sure you understand what I want you to know. I maybe am getting a little forceful about it. I really don't care because it's all about me. Well, that's what leads to aggressiveness. Now, on the other side of this continuum are people who are so focused on the other person, they don't take any of their own needs into mind. And so they don't say anything because they don't want to hurt someone's feelings. They just want to keep the peace. If you're too far on that end, you're likely to be passive. If you think about balancing the two, right in the middle, we have assertive. And assertive, again, is what we're going for. And that's what I'm hoping to teach you a little bit more about today. Now, I should throw her in as well. You maybe know this girl. She maybe works with you, and it's the person who's passive aggressive. And I'm going to treat this like a separate category today. So we'll have four. We have assertive, which is the good one, aggressive, passive, and then we have passive aggressive. Although I would argue that passive aggressive really is just another form of aggression. But like I said, for today, we'll count it as its own category. Now, let's start with what we're trying to do here. This is again what you want to be assertive. So what's that mean? Well, there's three words that come to mind that I think really do a nice job of sort of summing up assertiveness. And the first is direct. Direct is, it's like putting it out there. It's not it's not beating around the bush. You're being clear. You're being direct. The second one is honest. And honest is it's bringing up those things that maybe you don't want to bring up, but it's really how you feel. It's what you think. It's what you really want to say. And so it's putting it out there. And then the third thing is the idea of being respectful. So assertiveness is direct, honest, and respectful. And I think most of us have a pretty good idea of what respect looks like. We might have a hard time describing it, but we know when it's not happening to us. And we're probably, if pushed on it, could do a pretty decent job of knowing when we aren't being respectful. So how this shakes out, I made a nice little table for you. And you can think about, again, at the bottom we have assertive. Assertive is direct, honest, and respectful. So if you think about the other three styles, they're all missing something. And maybe in some cases more than one thing. So passive is, it's missing direct and honest. It's like, I'm not telling you what I really think. And if I am, I'm kind of doing it in a wishy-washy, around the side kind of way. So nobody really knows what I'm doing. Now, I would argue, or people who are being passive would argue, that they're doing it out of respect. So they would, give themselves a smiley face there. Now, aggression is typically, you know what they want. They're being pretty clear about it. They're maybe pointing it, they're in your face, talking about it. So they got the direct and maybe the honest thing going, but they don't have the respect thing. Now, the passive aggressive, interestingly, I would say is missing all three. It's rarely direct, it's rarely honest, and if you've been on the receiving end of it, you would say, I think you would say, it doesn't feel particularly respectful either. So let's look at these things, and what I'd like you to do as I'm working my way through this is just to think about, okay, so which are you? Let's say you're assertive most of the time, but we all have our moments, our moments of communication weakness. And in those rare instances, when you're not on your best communication behavior, which one sounds like you? Because if you can't figure this out, you're going to have a hard time making any changes that sort of move you toward the goal. And the goal, again, is to be assertive. So aggressive people, I think this picture sort of sums up what we think about, at least stereotypically, what does aggression look like? It's very forceful. It's intimidating. It's loud. It's hostile. It might feel abusive or threatening. People, she's got her finger right in the other woman's face, and I think, when you start looking at these behaviors, one interesting question I ask myself is, well, why would somebody do this? My suspicion is because people who are acting aggressively think that this is the only way to get what they want. And maybe that's what they've been taught. They've been taught from a very young age that, you get loud, you scream, you threaten, you bully, and you get what you want, and that behavior just sort of stuck with them. But I think another possibility is they just don't feel like they're being heard. And so when someone thinks that they're not being heard or understood, what they end up doing is sort of more of whatever they did before, and that more again comes across as louder or more forceful, and then it gets interpreted as being aggressive. So if this one is you, by the way, and you want to start moving towards something that's a little less aggressive, I'd work on the emotional response. Like, I think a lot of times people feel angry when they're aggressive. And so when you feel that sort of anger kind of welling up inside of you, this is the old, count to 10 rule. It's time to take a break, kind of step away, and just give yourself some time to cool off. And if you really got to, blow some steam, you might consider talking to somebody else about whatever concern or problem you have first, just sort of kind of get it out of your system a bit, and that will help you hopefully not, blow when you're right with somebody else. Now, passive, this one's an interesting one because I think people would think of folks who are passive as not really being a problem communication style at all. We think about people who don't necessarily say what's on their mind. If they have a concern, they don't raise it. If you ask them what do they think and they think the answer is going to be in any way controversial, they probably will say, well, I don't really care. I don't necessarily have an opinion. They might be cordial, friendly. Yeah, we would say these are really nice people. But I would argue it's still a problem because, especially at work, um, when you're behaving passively, you're not helping problems get solved. You're not fixing anything because you're not saying what you need to say. And then um, if you're upset later on that someone's behavior is offensive or they're not meeting your expectations, I would argue with you that, well, you led them to that behavior in some way, or you at least enabled it or supported it by never saying, hey, that's not okay, or I don't like that. I mean, it's possible the person's not meeting your expectations, and they're not doing it out of maliciousness. They're doing it because you never told them what your expectations were, and they had no idea. So if this is you and you're thinking, oh boy, I wish I wasn't quite so passive, there's a couple things you might be thinking about. And the first is to stop saying to yourself, it doesn't matter or I don't care, because my guess is it does matter and you do care. And so when you start being honest with yourself, I think that will help you eventually be honest with the people around you. The other little thing I might say is just to start, at least when people ask you for your opinion, especially when it's not terribly controversial, practice saying, hey, I do have an opinion. I don't like it. That's my opinion. Thanks for asking. And I think what you'll find is the more you do it, the more you'll notice that the world doesn't necessarily implode on itself. And that will give you practice and that will give you courage. Now, the third type that's a problem is the passive aggressive behavior. And I sum this up as backstabbing. Passive aggressive is kind of that Weasley behavior where you don't really know. Well, if you're on the receiving end of it, you know the person's getting you, but you're not even sure you can really put your finger on what exactly is it that they're doing, because it's all really subtle and kind of backhanded, and they're using sarcasm and they're using humor. And if here's the thing with passive aggressive people, they want to get this off their chest, whatever it is, they want to get it out, but they don't want to be viewed as a bad person, or they don't want you to be able to engage them in a really hard conversation about whatever is the issue is that they raised, which is kind of a weird thing to do. And they always leave themselves a couple escape routes. The first escape route is some version of, hey, I'm just joking. They made some snide little comment, you got ticked off about it, and then they're going to say, well, I was just kidding around. And then they're going to double zing you by saying, man, you're a little tense today. What's up? Or they're going to do the old, I didn't mean it. I didn't, you misinterpreted me. Look, when I'm not on my best communication behavior, this is what I do. I mean, I am all about this. I go with the smart aleck comments. I go with the, that sound, that tone in my voice. That's like, oh, whatever. Um, and it's hard. I sort of know it when I'm doing it. Although it does seem to happen pretty quickly, and sometimes I don't catch myself. But more often than not, I just can't help it. I just want to let those kind of comments out, and those kind of behaviors, let them sort of go forth and do the damage that they do. And I know I shouldn't, but it is kind of hard to stop. So if you're like me, here's a few things that I've learned to do. I pay more attention to my emotion. And again, I think the emotion that comes out is the same one that comes out with lots of folks that are acting aggressively. It's some version of anger. And so when I feel something, and I might not even recognize what it is, and I feel my mouth wanting to pop off something really, really quickly, it's almost like you got to slow down the brain and say, okay, what's going on here? Hey, I think I'm feeling something. It feels like an emotion. I wonder what emotion it is. Oh, I know, it's angry. I'm angry. What am I angry about? And then I figured it out. And then I suppose the next question I ask myself is, well, what should I do? And the funny thing is when I slow down the process and I actually think about the question, what should I do? Um, you know, the wrong answer never develops. It's not like, well, I should say something, and what I should say is some smart aleck comment that is going to set everybody off around me. I don't, that doesn't come to mind when I think about it. It's if I don't think about it that I have problems and I respond too quickly. So that's passive aggressive. Now, these are the types that are a problem, but let's say, you're here because I want to teach you how to say it in a way that's not passive aggressive and not aggressive and not passive. And so the first thing I think you really need to think about is, why do you want to say something at all? It's kind of like, what's the point you're trying to make, and why should you make that point? I mean, I think lots of times, again, we have some emotion and we're angry about something, or we're upset, or we're frustrated, and it is good and fine and perfectly okay for you to want to say something. Um, but I think the question is that you really got to think some about is, should you or not? And if you do, sort of like, again, the big question is like, why? Now, once you've done that, you start thinking through some of the how questions, and there are several how questions. I mean, so for example, some logistical things. How am I going to make my point? So how am I going to deliver my message? I have choices. I could call someone on the phone. I could send them a text or an email. I could flip them off in the hallway when they walk by. Based on this picture, this is my preferred method. I would suggest more times than not, if you have something you want to say or communicate that you think is going to be a little bit tricky, a face-to-face conversation is by far the best method. You might also think about when's a good time, and and where's a good place. I mean, most of these kind of conversations should probably happen in private, and I think we get good at knowing when our coworkers are busy or not. I mean, same with at home. I certainly know I certainly know when is not a good time to bring up um, possibly emotional issues at home. So figure out the how before you do, before you go ahead and try to do anything. Just a little planning can help a lot. And then once you do it, you got the how figured out. You say, "Yep, I'm gonna say something." Follow the process. And a lot of times when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about something called I statements. And many of you have probably heard of I statements. It's a three-part statement that says, when this happens, here's how I feel, and here's what I want instead. Or another version might be to add at the end to say because. But I think I might make it a little bit more generalized for today and just say, look, when you open the conversation, you've got to provide some context. Like, what are we talking about here? Uh, it might be you and a coworker. You don't think the person is doing as much as as much as you are. They're not really doing their fair share of the work, and you're upset about it. And so you might just start opening the conversation. It's like, hey Bob, I want to talk to you about how we share the work between the two of us. And he might have like what work are you talking about? I mean, and there might be a little bit more that goes back and forth to sort of to kind of get the context, but eventually he gets the, okay, I know what we're talking about. And when you've done that, that's a good thing, because then you're sort of eliminating one of the big problems that leads to the fight, which is someone misunderstands what you're trying to say. So what are we talking about? Provide the context up front. Then you make your point. It's like, well, what do you want? This might be something that you like, something that you don't like. It might be a request. You're going to ask the person for something. That might be to do something, or it might be to stop doing something. And I think you just say it. Now, if we go back to the concept of an I statement, I think, instead of saying, hey, Bob, you need to work harder, or you need to work faster, or you need to do more work. Um, you take the yous out of it, because when you put the yous in there, people feel they feel attacked and they don't like it, and that almost always starts a fight. So just flip it into the I statement. It's like, instead of saying what must Bob do, you start saying, here's what I want. Hey Bob, I want us to share the work more fairly. Um, I want us to do an equal amount of work. I want us to work side by side, and both of us feel like we're contributing to the best of our abilities. Whatever it is you want, whatever point it is you're trying to make, just just say it, but say it in a way that doesn't accuse and it doesn't blame. And then finally, and I think this really helps, is to give him a reason to care. So the middle part of an I statement is to let the person know this is how it's affecting me. And and the reason you do that is because I think it just humanizes the conversation. It's not me trying to be powerful and tell you what you need to do. I'm just saying, look, hey Bob, when we don't share the work between the two of us equally, I end up, right or wrong, I end up like working way harder. And then I go home and I feel resentful and I'm just feeling overtired. And frankly, it makes me like you less. And I don't want that to happen. And so this sort of rationale about what it is why it is you're saying what you're saying, I think it helps people understand it, because if you don't provide that, they fill in the story themselves. And if they don't get the story right, that leads to misunderstanding, and then the misunderstanding can once again cause a fight. All right, just two more tips and we're going to wrap up. If you follow that process well, I think there's kind of an overriding principle, and it might tie into the third part of assertiveness, which is to be respectful. But I think this idea of kindness, so often we put a lot of our energy into, I want to be right. And there are times when being right is really, really important, but not every time. And sometimes for the good of the relationship, I think you say, okay, is it better for me to be right, or is it better for me to be kind in this instance? And sometimes, kindness is the right choice. And if you make that choice, I think you'll know what to do and what not to do based on that decision. And then there's finally, if you want to be able to say things in a way that doesn't start fights, um, it's a lot better to have those kind of conversations with people who actually know you and like you. It's about relationships. So if you want to be at work and, mind your own business, keep your head down, do your own thing, and then whenever you notice something, just kind of pop out of that little bubble you've made for yourself and go say something, people aren't going to be that receptive to you because, well, they don't even know you and they have no relationship with you. So I think about this last strategy as sort of like an investment. You put some time and energy into building relationships. You have, honest conversations that aren't that hard. And over time, as a relationship builds, you'll be able to have conversations that are more and more challenging, because you've got this sort of established history to be able to have, talk about hard stuff, and the relationship continues. So let me sum up by saying this. You have the right to say what you want to say. It's called being assertive. Assertive is not necessarily about being overly nice. Overly nice is not helpful. That's actually passive. And it's not about being out there just saying everything you want in any way you want. That's aggressive. And, if you want to go with the snotty comments and the eye rolls and the shoulder shrugs, that's passive aggressive. But we're going for direct, we're going for honest, we're going for respectful. When you're going to say something, you should plan it out. What am I trying to say? Why am I trying to say it? How am I going to go about delivering this message? And then follow a process. And again, the process is really about provide some context, kind of sort of make your point, and then also offer some rationale so the person really understands, like, where are you coming from and what are you trying to do. And then finally, this idea of building a relationship, practicing having conversations, and being kind in the process. is what this is all about. So chances are right now you've got something that you want to say to somebody, but you haven't done it. You know, maybe something came up today, you didn't say something, or maybe there's something that's been sitting there for a little bit. It's been kind of stuck in your craw and you want to say it. Hopefully I've given you a few tools that you can use to make that happen. So I want to say I'm here. I'm happy to help. If you found this short little webinar helpful, I can do things like on-site workshops. We could take this kind of material, break it down, give your staff and your coworkers time to really sort of process it together, work on some exercises. Kind of a fun way to sort of work together and learn some good skills. Maybe there's some you or some people you know in the organization that just they're maybe a little too much on the aggression side, a little too much on the passive aggressive side, and they need some one-on-one coaching. I can do that. Or maybe you're interested in more videos like this. Um, you can check out my website. There are links to resources there. You can give or you can reach me via email that way. You can give me a call. I'd love to talk about what's going on in your organization and how I might help. And in the in the below here, in the YouTube below, I'll include a couple links as well of things that you might find helpful. So thanks for listening, and get out there and say what you need to say. Thanks.